Hi, I'm Brennan with EB5 United, and today we're going to talk about the basics of the EB5 program. We'll divulge into the Reform and Integrity Act of 2022, the changes that were made, and we'll go through the basics of EB5, how to make an investment, how the funding works, how to obtain a green card, and so on. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So what is the EB5 program? The EB5 program is a job creation program with an immigration benefit. So in this program, you have to invest money that gets into a project that creates 10 U.S. jobs. And so we help facilitate that process. Now, the money has to be what's called at risk in the project, meaning that it has the potential to gain or lose money. That doesn't mean that the projects have to be risky. We'll get into that here in just a minute. But it's an at-risk program where you have to put at least $800,000 into the project. Now, that $800,000 number is if you invest in what's called a targeted employment area, or a TEA. So if you invest in a TEA, it's $800,000. If you invest in a non-TEA, it's $1.05 million that you have to invest to obtain a green card. You have to use lawfully obtained money. We'll get into that and why that makes an immigration attorney so important. And then we have to create 10 jobs for every investor in the project. We'll explain how those jobs are created. And everyone in the family will obtain a green card. That means a husband and wife and any children under the age of 21 who are not married. So you, the primary applicant, your spouse, and any children under the age of 21 who are not married will obtain a green card by using the EB-5 program. By utilizing this program, you can live, work, study anywhere in the United States. You're not restricted to where you invested. So if you invest in Florida, you can move to California. It doesn't matter where you invest. You obtain a green card, and that can give you discounted education. If your kids go to an in-state school, and let's say you live in Florida and you send your kid to Florida State, they would receive tuition break of around 50%. Usually in-state tuition is about half of what people out of state are paying. You can travel in and out of the United States. You can travel all around the US. You can live anywhere in the US. And you can also become a citizen if you have the green card for 5 years and you're in the US over 183 days a year throughout those 5 years. And then you can easily gain citizenship once you've had the green card for 5 years. There's a lot of other benefits to being a green card holder. A lot of people are beholden to their H-1B employer and want a way out to be able to start their own business or work for another company and not have to be restricted by a visa. And so a green card can be a huge benefit to a ton of people. Now, there's a lot of students in the United States who invest in EB-5 as well so that they can secure their future after college in the US. So let's talk about the Reform and Integrity Act of 2022, or as we call it, the RIA. So the RIA really changed a lot in the program and did a lot to benefit the EB-5 investors. It did increase the amount from $500,000 to $800,000 that you have to invest. Now, that had been the same amount since 1990. So it was adjusted for inflation. And if you look at the inflation throughout that time, $800,000 in today's money is less than $500,000 in 1990 money. A massive change that was made by the RIA back in 2022 was allowing concurrent filing. What that means is if you are investing from within the United States, let's say you're on a student visa or a work visa, you can file what's called your I-526E petition, which is the petition to be approved for a green card. At the same time, you file your I-485 change of status. The change of status is what changes you from your work visa or your student visa to a green card holder. Now, you were not able to do this before the RIA, but now you can file both those petitions at the same time. Your I-485 obviously will not be approved until after your I-526E is approved. However, you will obtain an EAD work authorization and an advanced parole travel permit. Most investors receive this in about 3 to 4 months after filing. So that means that if you're in the US on a work visa or a student visa, you apply for EB-5, you concurrent file. Within around 3 to 4 months, you will likely have a work authorization, a travel permit, so you can work freely in the United States and travel in and out of the United States, which gives you a huge amount of the benefits of a green card while you're waiting for your green card in the process. So this makes filing from within the United States extremely valuable. Another part of the law was the implementation of set-aside visas, which essentially brought back the Indian and Chinese markets to EB-5. What had happened in the EB-5 program is there were so many investors from India and China that it started to create a backlog. And it was taking almost 15 years to get a green card from China and about 7 years to get a green card from India. Well, most of the rest of the world was getting green cards in 2 to 3 years. And so they made a big change that allows the Chinese and Indian investors not to have to wait in that backlog. And they also increased the adjudication capabilities so that investors are getting green cards even faster than the 2 to 3 years we were seeing in the past. We even had one who obtained a green card in 4 months recently. And so what these set-aside visas do is they allow targeted employment area, TEA investors, to skip the backlog. You can invest in 3 types of TEAs. One is infrastructure, which is 2% of all the visas in EB-5. One is high unemployment, which gets 10% of all the visas in EB-5 set aside. And the other is rural, which gets 20% of all the EB-5 visas set aside. So every year there's 10,000 visas added to the EB-5 program, and they're reserving 20% of those for rural, 10% for high unemployment, which means an urban project, and 2% for infrastructure projects, so that if you're from China or India and you're backlogged in the old program, you can skip that backlog and take one of those set aside visas. So it's a huge benefit for Indian and Chinese investors. Lastly, they also gave an additional benefit to rural. So not only does rural get 20% of the visas, but they also get priority processing. So we have been realizing approvals in an average of around 6 months in our rural projects. Since the RIA, we had 3 rural projects and 1 urban project or a high unemployment project that we have submitted petitions on. The first 2 projects we did, one was rural, one was high unemployment. The first cases were submitted around the same time. We have over 100 approvals, I-526E approvals on that rural project to date. And so those were filed fall of 2022, and we're here in June of 2024. On the urban project, we do not yet have an approval for an I-526E petition. So that shows you the benefit of investing in rural projects, as you will get the green card approval a lot faster than if you invest in a high unemployment project. There's also already likely a pretty large backlog for Chinese and Indian investors in the high unemployment set-aside category, and we'll get into that later. So what all do you need to invest in EB-5? Well, you'll have an $800,000 EB-5 investment that's required by the government. Usually the administrative fees for a project are around 10% of that. And then typically your attorneys will charge you $20,000 to $35,000 for the entire process. And then you have the USCIS processing fees, which recently increased to a little over $11,000 to file your petition. So it's a little over $11,000 to file plus a $1,000 integrity fee. So it's $12,160 to file your I-526E petition. You then have some fees at the I-829 stage, which we'll discuss here in just a minute. Those are a little under $4,000. So what all can you invest into the EB-5 program? What types of money can you use? This is showing your typical source of funds. And this also is the most important part of the entire process I want to highlight. Your immigration attorney is the person that sources your funds. So when you want to do the EB-5 program, let's say you're looking at EB-5 United, you want to do one of our projects, the first things that you will have to do before you send us $1 is you will have to hire a U.S. immigration attorney, and they will have to source all of your money and show where all of the $800,000 came from, as well as the money for the administrative fees. And they're going to put together that source of funds. Once that's completed, then we will allow you to send your money into our escrow account for the project, and then we'll loan it to the developer to create the 10 jobs. So a lot of people use different loans on properties or assets. A lot of people will take out a home equity line of credit, or a HELOC as it's known in the United States, especially for investors in the US that are concurrent filing. There's a lot of investors that utilize a HELOC. People use salary, an inheritance, a gift, stocks, bonds, dividends, earnings from ownership or sale of business. Now, you can't use direct business funds. They have to be your funds. But if you wholly own a business, it's pretty easy for your attorney to structure that and make sure that money gets into the deal. So this is how the process flows. And this is showing the difference between an investor that is filing from within the United States from an investor that's filing outside of the United States. Initially, as I mentioned, you're going to find your project that you want to invest in and hire an immigration attorney to source the funds. Once that's complete, then you'll move on to filing your I-526E petition. So you first have to wire us the money into the escrow account, and then that money gets sent to the project, and your I-526E petition is filed by your immigration attorney. We're seeing approvals in rural projects in around an average of 6 months. Like I mentioned, we've had some as fast as 29 days, 30 days, 31 days, 36 days in some of our projects, in our rural projects. We still do not have an approval in the one high unemployment urban project that we did since the RIA was passed. So those have been filed for more than a year and a half, and we still don't have any I-526E approvals outside of the rural areas. But we have well over 100 I-526E approvals in our rural projects. If you are inside the United States when you file your petition, we discussed earlier concurrent filing, where you also file your 485 change of status at the same time that you file your I-526E petition. So if you do that, you would have an EAD work authorization and advanced parole travel permit here within about 3 to 4 months after filing, before you even receive your I-526E approval. So you'll have the work permit, the travel permit, and then once your I-526E is approved, usually within about 6 to 10 months, people will receive the approval on their adjustment of status. Now, in the first few investors that we've had post RIA who have done concurrent filing and then received their adjustment of status, some of those adjustment of statuses have happened one was within a month, another was 4 months, and then a bunch have been around 3 to 6 months on average. So there is hope that this 6 to 10 months is going to stay lower here in the post RIA era. If you're outside the United States, then after you have I-526E approval, you need to set up an interview at the U.S. Embassy and go through consular processing. And that usually takes around 6 months to get an interview set up. So once you have that interview, they allow you to come to the U.S. You don't have to enter right away. You could take your time, or you could come that next week. The day you enter the United States will start your 2-year conditional green card, or the day you had adjustment of status approved starts your 2-year conditional green card if you invested from the U.S. And from there, you have to be on a green card for 2 years before you file what's called the I-829 petition. So the I-526 petition, the USCIS is looking at 2 things. One, was the project an approvable EB-5 project? And number 2, is your source of funds acceptable? When you get to the I-829 stage, the USCIS is looking at 2 things as well. One, was your money invested for the time required, which is 2 years after your money's been loaned to the developer? And 2, were 10 jobs created on your behalf? And so those are things that we handle for you. And by the time you get to the I-829 stage, you will know very clearly whether or not you're going to get approved, because you'll know whether the 10 jobs were created and whether the money was loaned for the time needed. After that, if you want to get a passport, you will have to do so after you've had a green card for 5 years. So you have to file this I-829 in the last 30 days of that 2 years, and you can start applying for citizenship within the last 30 days of that 5 years. So technically 4 years and 9 months. So how have the timelines changed in this process since the RIA? Let's go through that. So this is looking at the adjustment of status for urban and rural projects, urban high unemployment versus rural. What we've been seeing in our rural projects, the I-526E approval has been an average around 6 months. We've seen short as 29 days, as long as about 13 months. And then to receive your adjustment of status, we're putting 1 to 8 months, average of 4. That's kind of based off of the numbers that we have seen thus far. Then you have the green card, and then you receive your permanent residency. In an urban area, we still don't have an I-526E approval. We put 14 to 24 months, as we've seen a few approved in as short as about 14 months in the industry, but we are at around 20 months since we filed our first post-RIA urban project, and we still don't have any I-526E approvals. From here, once you receive your approval, it takes 1 to 8 months to get your change of status done and get your green card, and you have your green card 2 years, and then your permanent green card. So this is just showing you the difference in timing for urban versus rural projects that we've been realizing since the RIA. And this is just showing the same thing, but instead of doing concurrent filing, it is showing a 4 to 8 month process for consular processing. Let's talk a little bit about job creation. A lot of people think that in EB5, you have to count actual people who are working at the site. Now, that is not true of the regional center program. If you invested in what's called the direct EB5 program, that is true. And that's why there are more denials from direct EB5 projects than there are from regional center projects. And that's because we can use all of the direct, indirect, and induced jobs in regional center projects versus you have to count actual full-time W-2 employees at the end product of your project in a direct project. And so that's a difference in oftentimes hundreds or thousands of jobs created in a project. And what that also means is that our jobs can never go away. If you invest in the direct program, you can get to 10 jobs, but then maybe a couple people get fired and you drop below 10 jobs and you will lose your green card approval, your permanent green card approval. In the regional center program, as long as money is spent on the project, those jobs never go away because we use an economic modeling. So we have numbers, a multiplier number for every section of the project. So let's say that you are every $1 million that's invested in the new hard construction of a project is 15 jobs. And every $1 million in furniture, fixture, and equipment is 7 jobs. And these are government economic models that they give us. So you multiply however many million spent on construction times 15, that gives you jobs. As long as that money is spent, those jobs don't go away. And you know that they're there to count for your green card. So we're counting direct, indirect, and induced jobs. So if we're building a hotel, right, that's going to bring on restaurants and coffee shops next door. That's going to be induced impact from the project. And then we have the direct jobs at the site, but also the indirect jobs. Okay, so you're installing furniture at the site. Well, where was that built? Maybe it was built in North Carolina, since that's where the majority of furniture in the US was built. And then how did it get to the site? Well, there was shippers and suppliers and distributors and subcontractors involved throughout that entire process. So that is why we're able to quantify so many jobs created in every EB5 project utilizing the regional center program. All right, this is a very important slide to understand, and I'm going to go very slow on it so that anyone who is new to this can understand how this works. But this is essentially how the money flows into an EB5 project and flows back out. The NCE in EB5 stands for New Commercial Enterprise. Think of this as an EB5 fund. What this will be is an entity. It'll usually be an LLC or an LP, limited partnership. And then you're going to have an NCE manager. In all of our projects, that would be EB5 United. EB5 United is managing the NCE or the EB5 fund. Most people in EB5 will call the NCE manager the regional center. The regional center is actually another entity that is just approved to sponsor regional center projects. So sometimes the NCE manager owns the regional center, sometimes they don't. But in EB5, you will typically call the NCE manager the regional center. So we at EB5 United manage the NCE or EB5 fund for every project. And let's say we're raising $100 million. So that would be 125 investors putting $800,000 into the NCE. So when you send us your money, you're actually not sending it to EB5 United. You're sending it to the NCE, which you own one share of, worth $800,000. From there, we make a loan agreement between the NCE and the project. Now, the money can go in EB5 as debt or equity, but I'll explain in a minute why we stick to debt, because we just cannot justify the low returns you would receive in an equity project for the amount of risk that you would be taking in an equity project. And so it's just very rare that you'll see a true pari passu common equity project in the EB5 markets. You'll usually see debt. So the money gets lent from the NCE to the JCE. The JCE is the job creating entity. The job creating entity is where the 10 jobs are created. That is the project that is owned by a developer. And then oftentimes you'll have a bank or some other type of lender or investor that's putting money into the project. At the end of the EB5 loan, then the JCE will have to repay the NCE. And then every investor here owns one share worth $800,000. So the $800,000 gets paid back. And every year of the loan, the developer is also paying interest. So if the developer does not pay the interest, or they do not pay the loan back at the end of the loan term, they are in default. It's just like a bank lending you money for a mortgage on a house. If you don't pay your mortgage, the bank will take your house away from you and they'll sell it to get their money back. If the developer and the project does not pay the NCE, its interest, or pay back the principal investment, then the NCE will take over the project and sell it or do whatever is needed, operate it, complete it, whatever is needed to be able to get the money back and pay themselves back. So the way to minimize risk is to take a safer position in the capital stack. So this is showing the different types of money that typically come into EB5. A lot of times in a development project, you'll have a senior loan, which will be around half of the project costs. And then a lot of EB5 is either mezzanine debt or preferred equity. So a mezzanine loan is like a second position loan. If the developer defaults and doesn't repay, then the senior loan is the first that gets repaid. The mezzanine loan is the second that gets repaid. And then it goes to preferred equity, and then it goes to developer equity, which the developer equity, if you're investing there, if the project loses a single dollar, you're going to lose money out of your $800,000. Versus if you're a senior lender, the developer would have to lose everything. If there's mezz or preferred equity behind you, they would have to lose everything before you would lose a single dollar. So that's why senior debt is the safest position, then mezz, then preferred equity, and then common equity. Now in EB5, you're only going to maybe see like a 3 or 4% return in common equity projects. And that's usually money that you would see a 20 to 30% return on. And so we just cannot find enough investors who are willing to take that much risk for that little return. And that's why we don't typically do pari passu common equity projects in the EB5 program. We like to stick to either mezz with a lot of equity or senior lending, which all of our current rural projects are. This is showing some past projects. This is a senior loan and a mezz loan that we did. This is the Nine Orchard Hotel in New York City. We lent $88 million on this $223 million project. So the developer put $135 million of equity in. Essentially, this developer would have to lose this $135 million, and we would have to take over the deal before we lost any money for the EB5 investors. So as long as we could take over the deal and sell it for 40 cents on the dollar, every investor would be repaid. And the asset would have to be worth $0 for the EB5 investors to lose all their money. Here's another project where we had a high equity model, but we were mezz. So we had a senior loan of $175 million, and then $63 million of EB5, and then $196 million of equity supporting us. So the developer would have had to lose this equity before we lose money as a mezz lender. Now, if this project was already successful, repaid. This is another project in Big Sky where we're currently doing some raises on the Yellowstone Club phase 2. But if the developer was to default on this mezz, then on this, which it won't because it's already been repaid, it was successful. Once again, I'm Brennan Sim. Thank you for watching this presentation. I hope it was beneficial to you. If you have additional questions, please reach out to us at EB5 United. Thank you.